Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from the Prospect Fund, announcing the film All That's Left of You, a multi-generational drama that traces the hopes and heartaches of an uprooted Palestinian family. Screenings at the Little Theater, January 23rd through 29th. Showtimes and tickets at thelittle.org.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Well, our connection this hour is made with this new state budget from Governor Kathy Hochul, which followed up the governor's State of the State address last week. And now we're starting to see the outlines of where the legislature may go here. We're going to be talking to your elected leaders in the weeks to come. Yesterday, we had State Senator Jeremy Cooney leading off. Today, Assemblymember Josh Jensen. We're going to talk to their colleagues one-on-one so you can understand what they see in this budget, what they'd like to see prioritized or changed or not. And it's a chance for you to ask really anything you like of your elected leaders as we sit down for these conversations. And as I mentioned, my guest this hour is a Republican in the New York State Assembly, New York State Assembly member Josh Jensen, representing District number 134. Welcome back to the program.
Happy to be back, Evan.
So, it's interesting. Yesterday, talking to Senator Cooney, I was reading from some of my colleague Jimmy Vielkind's work. And Jimmy was pointing out that the governor's budget always gets a bit of a fight, whether going back previous governors. And typically in the state Democrats, though not always, in the future, who knows? But the governor tends to have a fight within their own party about things like school funding, sometimes child care funding. And Vielkind notes that this year there's a little less of that stuff, that the biggest item within the Democratic Party is going to be whether there should be new taxes or higher taxes on the mega earners, the super millionaires' taxes. And the governor says no. And some Democrats say yes. I think you're probably with the governor on this one.
Yes, I am. And typically what happens, and you're not wrong, and Jimmy is not wrong about the assessment. But the way I look at it is I think the fight may be coming later. Typically what we've seen over the past 4 years is the governor will go very aspirational with her executive budget proposal, and she'll put in a lot of things, probably with the knowledge that she's going to have to negotiate some of that back, and she puts it in so she can take it out and get something else from the legislature. What I think is going to happen this year, mainly because we are in an election year where the election of Zohran Mamdani, the governor's own primary, I think is going to push a lot of these fights closer to the April 1 deadline to get a budget, and really be instigated more by the legislature about what they want to see happening to respond to political realities from the folks they represent.
What's the biggest fight you see coming?
I think it's going to be about raising revenue. And that's always the battle we have as a state, is that, the governor proposed a $260 billion executive budget proposal, the highest in the state's history. But a lot of it is based on recurring programming, and very rarely does the state do one-off fundings. We don't do a ton of capital projects. A lot of it is we're creating new child care avenues. We're creating new fundings for schools and for healthcare. And I think what the fight is going to boil down to this year is that I think, based on why Zohran Mamdani is now the mayor of New York City, I think there may be a push that we want to push the boat out even further and try to create more programs. What they are, I don't know at this point, but looking at ways to create revenue so that the state could be more aspirational in their eyes. I don't necessarily think that's the right avenue to go, but I think that may be a political reality, especially coming from New York City-based colleagues.
You were a colleague, of course, of Zohran Mamdani before he becomes New York City mayor, although different caucuses. Did you interact much with him over the years?
Yeah, we the first couple of years he was part of the card game I was a part of.
Game?
He interestingly didn't redistribute his wealth to the folks who lost when he won, but certainly
that's such an easy shot for you to take, isn't it?
It was, and it's not even mine. I stole that from another member of that card game, was Congressman Mike Lawler, because we were just a bunch of freshmen in COVID with nothing else to do. I had a very pleasant relationship with him when we'd see each other in the hall or in the members' lounge. I don't think he and I ever debated a bill on the floor. We didn't ever really talk policy. But we, in the course of being colleagues for 4 years or 5 years, Yeah, knew him, not intimately, but we were
Yeah.
friendly.
Is he a good card player? I mean,
I
he's not as
honestly-
good as you.
I mean, I'm a pretty bad card player.
Oh.
So I don't have that great of a poker face. So I think everybody's a better card player than I am.
Okay. Now, he does strike me as sincere in where he wants to take New York City, and he's going to be asking the state to partner. One of the first big announcements came with the governor on child care.
Yep.
Does that go too far for you?
I don't think it goes too far. One of the issues I've had with the way we've tried to address the child care crisis, which 100% needs to be addressed, is that the state solution has often been to throw money at the problem and say that the current way it's constructed, it'll solve it. More money will solve it. And that's not the case. What we saw with the governor's child care proposal was that at least now we have some sort of plan. It's very New York City centric. But I was very happy to see that Monroe County is one of 3 counties in the state outside of New York City to get, I think it was $20 million for a pilot program so that we could create more child care seats. I think it's like 1,000. But really allowing local leadership to determine the best way to make those dollars effective. I think the larger question is, how are we going to look at childcare differently? Because access to childcare, more often than not, is going to be the driver in what determines whether or not a parent is going to re-enter the workforce or stay home. And I think that's, my own family had that conversation when we had our twins. Was my wife going to go back to work, or was she going to stay at home? And I think that's an important conversation a lot of parents have, whether they're new parents or their kids are elementary or middle school age.
One of the things I hear from some of your colleagues in the Republican Party is, of course, child care is important, but the state can't do everything. The state doesn't have money to do everything, and that there's got to be limits here. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I think it's all about what is the return on investment, and are we utilizing, if we're going to look at what the state is doing in the construct of a $260 billion budget, are we spending the money as efficiently and effectively as possible? We don't take despite the comptroller's best efforts, we don't ever do, or at least it's not shown to me and the colleagues that I speak to, a forensic audit of how state taxpayers are being spent. Are we creating new recurring programs that are being duplicated elsewhere in state government? Are local governments doing a better job of administering something and the state's duplicating services there? And I think that's an important part of determining if it's a thing that we can afford as a state on behalf of our taxpayers.
A couple other things with child care. It sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you think at least the notion of a pilot idea is better than just sort of a sweeping brand new program that throws a lot of money. Are you down with the whole pilot idea?
I love the idea of a pilot program because we're actually going to find out if it works. And if Monroe County, Dutchess County, which I think is one of the other ones, I can't remember the third county that's receiving these funds, but if we're all doing something different, we can see what the current situation is, if the investment has made a difference, and maybe that can be a model for other communities that are having the same circumstances. Certainly, you talk to the Children's Agenda. I think our lack of access for childcare, early intervention services, probably higher than a lot of the other places in the state. But can we figure out a mechanism to address these that could be a model elsewhere? And the only way you're going to do that is through pilots.
So I have a question that's probably pretty ignorant here, but I mean, I'm just thinking about your point about just putting money towards something doesn't automatically solve it. And one of the things that we hear with childcare, it may be similar to what we hear with early intervention or nursing home care, is that yes, we have issues with the workforce, people feeling like they can make more money doing other things, people leaving. If we put a lot of money toward childcare, just as an example, do we automatically know that there's a workforce that's going to step forward and take more jobs if we open them up? Maybe there is. I don't know.
No, you don't.
Is it possible there is?
It's possible, but you don't know. And what's the, I'm sure somebody smarter than me may have this data, but what's Monroe County's current child care workforce? How many total child care spots are available? Where are child care providers not having certain spots online because they don't have the staff? And I think that's an important metric to figure out, okay, where is their capacity? part of the governor's proposal is also to increase access to early childhood education, which I think we want to get kids on a more solid foundation to be lifelong learners to succeed in our modern society. I think having full universal pre-K is going to be a critical aspect of doing that. And that's why it's not just about creating more capacity to do that, but also it's the capital investment to allow school districts, other early childhood education providers to build out the physical space to hire those people to bring kids in when it's age appropriate.
This is where I think you get some interesting bedfellows when it comes to issues where sometimes this looks like an obvious, like Republicans are going to be on this side, Democrats on another, but it's not always the case when it comes to childcare. There is there's a pronatalist movement that is typically pretty socially conservative, but is concerned about birth rates in the United States, birth rates in the Western world, and they've been plummeting. Our birth rate now is below replacement level, and there's a lot of concern about that. So how do you encourage more people to have kids? So pronatalists are often in favor of things like child tax credits and opportunities for families to feel like they can have kids or have more kids. At the same time, there is a strain in the social conservative movement that says it's better when kids are raised by their direct parents, and that we don't want kids in daycare all day. That if we can create a system, and sometimes it looks like often the male's a breadwinner, the female stays home, not always, but that's more desirable than just daycare all day. Where do you fall on some of that stuff?
I mean, I think certainly parents play a huge role in the development of their children, in the raising of their children. But I don't think it's a one size fits all approach, and it's going to be different for each family. Somebody may live in a part of a state where you need to have a 2-income household, and the 2 incomes have to come from both parents, not just one parent having 2 jobs. Because that's also not the best case scenario where you have one parent staying home, but yet the other parent has to work 2 or 3 jobs just to maintain the financial viability of the household. I know the Vice President, J.D. Vance, has been very outspoken on birth rates. I saw that yesterday or 2 days ago that he's doing his part to fix that because his wife's now expecting their 4th child.
Yeah, that's right.
But I also think it's one of those things that if families want to have more children, they have to know that there's going to be a way, one, to afford it, but also, two, make sure that there can be a safe place for them to be if both parents are going to be working. And so I don't think it's an either or. I think you can have, yes, we want to have kids being raised by parents, but we also have to understand there needs to be options if that's not the reality for every family.
Okay. And one other note on this, we talked yesterday with Senator Cooney about his concern about the federal government possibly withholding funds in this area with concern about fraud. And so there's a very serious fraud investigation going on in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. And the Trump administration has said there's 5 other states that they're looking at withholding funds from because they're concerned about fraud. And New York State is on that list. Do you think those are legitimate concerns?
I think when we have the governor of New York State coming out and completely changing the way we're managing a program like CDPAP and saying that the biggest issue for that is fraud, and we have similar programs where it's essentially Scouts Honor, I can understand why somebody would be nervous that, well, is New York State really doing everything it can and exhausting due diligence to ensure that there's fraud not happening? What I would have liked to see is that if the federal government has concerns, instead of saying we're going to pause, shut the tap off while this is investigated, I'd rather say, okay, listen, we're going to closely scrutinize this. We expect you as New York State and the Attorney General and any office that's appropriate to closely investigate and then make appropriate corrections if that fraud does exist. I think cutting the money off for an undetermined amount of time could potentially do harm if there is not as much fraud or as widespread fraud as the federal government may think there is. I think certainly we should root out waste, fraud, and abuse, but I do have concerns about what it could mean if it takes 2 years to fully investigate without state involvement in that investigation.
There's probably no doubt that there is some non-zero level of fraud
100%. Yeah.
In an area like this in every state in the country.
100%.
Okay. Is there anything that you've seen, any evidence that says New York State has got another Minnesota on its hands?
evidence that I've seen.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
But I also don't have the same resources as the federal government or even the state inspector general. And I think and I don't know the 5 states off the top of my head, but my guess is that they are very high population states as well. So I think that
They're all states that voted for Kamala Harris. Do you think there's anything political about this?
coming out of Washington, D.C., I don't think anything political ever comes out of Washington, D.C. ever.
Okay. Well said. Assemblymember Josh Jensen is my guest. He represents district number 134. I want to talk to you about an issue that a couple of our callers yesterday brought up. And listeners, as we talk to state lawmakers, if you want to join the program, you can call toll-free 844-295-TALK. It's 844-295-8255. 263-WXXI if you're in Rochester, 263-9994. Email the program, connections@wxxi.org. Couple questions about affordability yesterday. What's the state's role in making life more affordable for New Yorkers?
One of the biggest things I hear from the folks that I represent is that it's expensive and hard to be a New Yorker. And whether it's they're going to the grocery store, they're getting gas, they're trying to send their kid to college, which, they may, they're not saying whether they're sending their kid to a SUNY institution or a private school or a state, but I hear a lot, whether it's people coming to my office, me going door to door, that they're like, it's hard for us, and it's hard because it's expensive. And I think what the state's role is in addressing an affordability crisis is taking a holistic, wide-ranging look about what is causing that lack of affordability for residents. Is it the taxes and fees? Is it what's in place for businesses that are choosing to divest from New York and move to other states? Is it families saying they want to raise their kids elsewhere, or retirees saying, I can't do it anymore on my retirement and Social Security, and I'm going to move down to the Carolinas? And I think that I don't think there's a magic wand to address it that Kathy Hochul can whip out and Avada Kedavra it. But I think there is something that the legislature should look at. What are the key indicators, and what can the state do to lessen the burden of inaffordability to make New York grow financially?
I'm going to try to fact check you on the fly on one thing.
Perfect.
I think it's Avada Kedavra.
It kills people, so it's probably not the best. Harry Potter.
I don't. Is there an R in there that he missed? This is a very important fact check. Yeah. Anyway, I think it's
I'll
Kedavra.
go Asio, because that's the come to me spell, I think.
I actually didn't even read all 7 books, but I thought I remember the.
I was a nerd who I would go to Barnes and Noble at midnight so I could buy it, and then
I love that.
I'd read the entire book in the first 24 hours.
Unfortunately, I saw the movies. Saw a great Onion headline that said, "New Harry Potter movies open kids up to the magic of not reading." Now let's get back on track here.
Yes, sir.
So back to the question of affordability. I'm very curious to know what you think about what looks like a burgeoning debate about auto insurance. So it came up yesterday. Senator Cooney brought it up, and he seems to be on the governor's side that says it's a little too loosey-goosey, that the governor is proposing, as Jimmy Vielkind reports, to tighten up the definition of a serious physical injury in a car accident under state law, a designation that allows someone involved in an auto crash to win damages for pain and suffering in addition to their medical expenses. And the governor says this is driving up premiums, and that is making it hard to afford life in New York State. That we've got higher premiums in other states. She knows that trial lawyers are against this. That's a big lobby, but she also knows the insurance companies are for this. That's another big lobby. So it's kind of a substantive debate. You've got powerful money interests on both sides, but it's a debate about whether the current system is right. That is it too loose? Are there too many people claiming pain and suffering and getting big damages and driving up premiums for the rest of us, or is that an overstatement? Where are you on that?
Well, I think, I'm not going to claim to be an expert on auto insurance. I do sit on the Assembly Insurance Committee, but we do less on auto insurance than on a lot of other insurances. But it was funny when we were chatting before the show, the news break was talking about how New York is among the nation leaders, I think, in auto accidents. So
highest number per capita accidents?
That's okay.
Yeah,
somebody
we'll
have to fact check me along with Harry Potter, but I thought I heard that as we were talking.
Okay.
And certainly, if we're going to have rates of accidents at a nationally high level,
Yeah.
my guess is that that is the biggest indicator of why insurance companies may be charging higher premiums, because they're paying out more claims for these accidents. And so I think that's a big issue. I also don't know, I don't think there's a lot of disclosure from insurance companies about how premium rates, whether they're auto insurance or healthcare rates, are determined. Everything, it's in a black box. You get a letter and it's like, okay, this is what it is. And there's not any clarity, at least with utility rates. They have to go before the Public Service Commission and they have to justify it. And there's public comment period. That doesn't exist for insurance. And I don't know if that's a problem that we used to have as a state, a Department of Insurance, a standalone state agency. Now it's a part of Division of Financial Services that also regulates the money markets. Would we have greater oversight by the state of insurance companies if we had a standalone insurance company or insurance department as the regulator, not part of a larger department? And those are all questions I don't have the answer to.
So, correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like you need more information before you figure out which way you may go on this one.
And I'd be very interested to hear either from the governor or from insurance companies or for advocates advocating for this policy. Like, what is the driver of auto insurance costs?
Yeah. Okay. Do you think that this is likely to be a big political fight?
I don't know how much of it may be a political fight amongst lobbyists, but I don't have a lot of constituents calling me and saying I'm okay with my insurance rates being so high, and I want to take the side of the auto insurers. So I think it's going to be more of a backroom fight than a political fight that's going to be fought in the news.
Okay, that is certainly one we'll follow. I mean, until the last few days, that was down in the weeds. I had no idea that was even brewing.
And I think somebody who worked in the field, maybe as an attorney representing these types of cases, they may have a better understanding about what the mechanism is in being able to go after folks if they do stage an accident, cause an accident. So I think even somebody, a legislator who has a greater background knowledge may be more able to talk about the intricacies of how these processes are determined, and if this is a common sense way to approach the larger problem.
All right. Let me ask you about a separate issue that is, again, another one that was not on my radar. Alcohol licenses.
Yeah.
What's going on?
So the governor proposed some new alcohol licenses, and it would allow for adult care facilities to have on-premise license, airline lounge licenses, which I always thought they could serve alcohol, but maybe there's something different, cafe licenses, higher education on-premises licenses, hotel concessions for license and permits, and early morning sports bars. So it sounds like taking the one-size-fits-all approach about how we allow for places to serve alcohol and really breaking it down into what type of business or location it is to determine like what license they can get.
What's the purpose of this kind of change?
It's a very good question. My guess is, I had an older woman who lives in a independent living facility in Greece call me because she had, and I forget what the state agency was, that she wanted to drink wine on her balcony.
And she wasn't allowed?
She was not allowed to.
Huh.
And because the place where she was living, the complex, they didn't have a liquor license. So even though that was her home, because she was drinking it outside the walls of her apartment room, it was verboten. So my guess is, I think the cynical way to look at it was, well, now if we create all these different licenses, now we can get more people to pay the license fee for it, and maybe that's a way to increase fees. The other way to look at it would be, okay, we see that soccer fandom is taking off, and you and I are both Everton football fans, and now maybe a place that doesn't have a liquor license may want to host, watch parties for Arsenal games, and they may want to get a liquor license to do that, but not to serve alcohol throughout the day. So I think maybe it's to create more options for circumstances that may exist.
Okay, so it will be it will be advertised as a way of creating more freedom and more options for people.
I think it could be.
It could be tied to more revenue for the state.
It could. I mean, you look at colleges, and I don't know, I went to Niagara University. We didn't have a bar or restaurant on campus, but they would often host galas or other things where alcohol would be served. And now maybe that's a circumstance where they instead of getting a one-off special use permit every time they want to do a gala, they can get a higher education on premises license for these type of events, so they don't have to reapply every time they want to do it.
See, the other interesting thing that's happening at the same time is Americans are drinking a lot less.
Yes.
CBS News just had a report on what they described as oceans of unsold alcohol from some, sort of the bigger producers.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about the Finger Lakes wine industry. I'm thinking about local brewers and distillers. It's not an easy time.
No.
But it doesn't look like that's related here. It might be more related to either personal freedoms or state revenue, not just that people are drinking less. Let's find ways to get.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and there wasn't really. It was part of the budget proposal, which I'm surprised it wasn't in the state of the state. But I think it'd be an interesting conversation to have, especially about the larger debate about whether or not we're going to move on something like wine and grocery stores.
Well, where are you on wine and grocery stores, by the way?
I'd like to see more data and more what the effect has been on other states where they've allowed it. I know one version of the bill would say that if a liquor store is in the same plaza as an eligible grocery store, that the grocery store wouldn't be eligible. So I think we need to learn more information, and I'd like to know the true impact on the small businesses that are liquor stores about how they would be impacted. And if it is going to be something we're going to do, then both sides need to benefit. And maybe that's allowing liquor stores to sell cheeses, crackers, and other things.
But I've heard this debate for years.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like it's got much zip compared to past years. Or maybe I'm wrong.
It gets, as we get into usually around budget time, towards the end of session, it gets a little, like somebody gave it a shot of caffeine, or in Pulp Fiction when John Travolta,
Yes, yeah.
and it gets a lot of adrenaline right at the end, and then it kind of dies out. But I think it's an important conversation. But I think that, once again, the devil's going to be in the details.
So after we take our only break, I'll get some questions from listeners for State Assembly member Josh Jensen, who's joining us this hour. He represents District Number 134. And we're talking about the proposed state budget from the governor, the priorities that Assembly member Jensen would like to see, and analyzing some of what might be behind some of these new proposals. So we'll take that break, come back to your feedback on the other side.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Bob Johnson Auto Group, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson. Believing an informed public makes for a stronger community. BobJohnsonAutoGroup.com.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. First, Chris wants to know, is there any discussion about analyzing whether the estate tax cliff is beneficial or detrimental to the state? Does the fact that no other state has one raise concern that it pushes some out? I don't know what this one is.
So just on the estate tax, which I'll be honest, I'm not as familiar with it. I don't have an estate. But my guess is it's about passing that if you will your home or your estate to next of kin, that there's essentially an inheritance tax. That's my guess. But I think that's part of what I was talking about larger, is that we need to actually figure out about, do the things that we have in place, whether they're taxes, are they benefiting us, or are they causing more harm? Are people not buying larger properties, larger homes, or not passing them down because their children have to pay a tax on it? And I think that's an important part of, we're going to talk about affordability. Everything needs to be scrutinized to figure out what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, and where those types of taxes can be overwhelming.
Okay. Chris, thank you. Pete wants to know if what you have seen in our state from ICE looks appropriate to you.
So certainly, I don't think we've seen, at least in the news that I've seen, that we're seeing quite as much ICE enforcement action or to the level that it's been in other states. Certainly, what happened to the woman in Minnesota, it's heartbreaking anytime somebody loses their life in that type of conflict. There has been, I obviously saw the thing a couple months ago where there was an enforcement mechanism in the city of some roofers.
Yeah, right. On Westminster. Yep.
Yeah, so the raiding of I think a manufacturer in central New York, and I don't think certainly I don't think it's been as ICE involvement has been as widespread or as loud in New York as it's been in some other states. But that just could be that it's not being done loudly, and that's I don't know what's the case.
Does the Renee Good shooting look justified to you?
I'm not going to claim to be an expert on what is justified and what's not. Certainly, I don't know what's going through a law enforcement officer's head when they pull the trigger of their firearm. Whether it was that incident, whether it's incidents we've seen here locally, I don't know what's going through somebody's mind. I wasn't there. I'm looking at it from one angle.
Well, more than one angle.
But we're seeing it. So I wish I had an answer to that question. I don't. I don't want to see law enforcement ever have to be in a situation where they have to take somebody's life.
Do you think they should be allowed to wear masks, ICE agents?
I think it depends on the circumstances. I have a tough time when we see legislation come through or proposals that come through, especially when we're talking about law enforcement prerogative, doing a one-size-fits-all approach. I've always been the type of person like, listen, especially when you're dealing with issues of law enforcement, of public safety, that the situation at hand should dictate the appropriate response and action. I've never been a cop. I don't know when it is appropriate and when it's not appropriate for them to have facial coverings. So I think it'd be important to hear from law enforcement on whether or not they deem it warranted.
Yeah, I guess my question for them would be, what makes you different as an ICE agent? It's a high-profile, public-facing job here, but the public has a right to know who is interacting with them when they're armed officers of the state, don't they?
I think that's a fair thing, but we've also looked at after the protests a few years ago, where we had police officers being doxxed, and so I think that there is a law that they have to have their name visible, their badge number, but if we also have law enforcement officers being doxxed, then I think that's also part of their safety as well.
Well, on the subject of protesting, I want to read more from Jimmy Vielkind's reporting on what may end up being sort of a political flashpoint this year. And he's writing about the governor's push, which started last year, a push for additional restrictions on people wearing masks in public, and then proposing now to create a 25-foot protest-free buffer zone around houses of worship. And this is from Jimmy Vielkind's reporting, quote, similar to the masking restrictions, the current proposal has support from Jewish leaders and legislators, but it raises First Amendment concerns, said Justin Harrison, a senior policy counsel for the New York Civil Liberties Union. He says, I'm not sure we want to give the police yet another tool to single out protesters for the offensive things that they may say, and that's exactly what a buffer zone law like this would do. But the governor says it would help combat anti-Semitism. And this is some of what Governor Hochul said in her State of the State address. Quote, protesters led pro-Hamas chants outside of synagogue in Kew Garden Hills. That's not free expression. That's harassment. Those who simply want to pray can do so without fear or harassment, end quote. So that's what the governor says about that. In Minneapolis, we saw people protesting ICE go into a house of worship. And a lot of people were very nervous about that moment. Well, so what do you make of this?
I also remember during the Iraq War that there would be protesters at the funerals of service members who died in the service of our nation in a war that they didn't declare, but they answered the call of our country.
Right.
And they had protesters at their funerals, both at the cemetery and at the churches where their funeral masses were taking place, and that was inappropriate. And so I think that when Americans are seeking to have the free expression of their faith, I guess, and this is where a constitutional law scholar would have to weigh in, is what amendment is the first one? Is it freedom of speech or is it freedom of expression? And which one is both? Because if people are not able to freely express their religion because there's protesters and they don't feel safe, does somebody's freedom of speech, which right is...
Does it supersede someone's right to worship freely?
Correct.
Because certainly some people's right to worship freely has been disrupted.
And
we saw that in Minneapolis.
And I've talked to colleagues who are Jewish in the Assembly and the Senate who feel threatened in their own communities because of their faith. I've talked to Jewish members of our own community here in Rochester and Monroe County who, through actions of other folks, they feel unsafe. And I take them at their word. And I guess I think that's a question each person would have to answer about. Well, my inclination is that you still have your freedom of expression. Do it 26 feet away.
When the governor says, when protesters lead pro-Hamas chants outside of synagogue, that's not free expression, that's harassment. Do you agree?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is this going to be a political flashpoint at all, or do you think this one passes?
I think it'll be a flashpoint. I mean, we looked at last year's budget fight to ban the wearing of masks on public transportation in New York City. That became a political fight. And I think this is even more, I think there's even more passions on this one because we're talking about people's faiths. And we're talking about, I'll be honest, I think some of these protests are designed to inflame tensions and are designed to try to provoke a response to further their own cause. Is that really your freedom of speech at that point, or are you trying to incite something?
No, what I find kind of baffling when you look at, just take Minneapolis. So people go into a house of worship that's holding a service. You walk into a church and, you know, the people who are there to pray and worship were scared.
Yeah.
And the optics are so bad. This is a moment when the way independents look at ICE is cratering. Now, polling shows that Americans are pretty evenly split on whether they still want the deportations that are happening. But they don't like what they're seeing from ICE, unless MAGA Republicans do. Non-MAGA Republicans are like a thin majority pro-ICE. Independents, it's cratered.
Yeah.
And then you do this, you go into a house of worship, and the optics are so bad. And I don't think it actually benefits the cause of the people who are doing it. I would love to ask them, what were you hoping to accomplish with that moment? But I mean, that says nothing about whether it should be legal.
Yeah.
Just strategically, I don't get it.
Yeah,
But that's not the same as standing 26 feet out or even 10 feet outside a house of worship. But you're comfortable with the 25-foot rule?
because that is if somebody's standing 25 feet in front of a house of worship and they're stopping people, but they have to step back 1 foot, they still have their freedom to express themselves.
Yeah.
And if that's what the governor and law enforcement and faith leaders believe is a safe distance to allow people to still access their place of worship, then I'm inclined to support that.
I mean, I remember covering the Westboro Baptist Church in their heyday. Do they even still exist?
I don't think so.
I kind of hope not.
I'm sure Vice has done something on it. No free ads. But I'm sure Vice has done something on it.
You know, they would protest funerals.
Yeah.
They would protest all kinds of stuff. And when you talk about protesting a soldier's funeral, it's distasteful to most Americans at minimum. I don't know that it should be illegal. I don't know that you should be able to kind of, again, disrupt or block a service. But this is where it's tough because even distasteful expression is largely protected, right? I
mean, we have, and this is an apple and oranges comparison, but you're not allowed to yell fire in a theater. You're not allowed to yell bomb on a plane out of concern for public safety. I think there is a correlation that we've already have under the law certain limits on people's safety, on how you can express yourself. I think that would fall in line with the same type of constitutional viewpoint.
Let me grab a phone call from Rick in Brighton. Hey, Rick, go ahead.
Evan, thanks for this discussion. All I wanted to do was add one other detail to it. My understanding is that in the abortion protest movement, there were safe zones around abortion clinics that limited the distance under which protesters could have access to the clinics or their clients. And it seems to me that that was constitutionally upheld, that zone of where you couldn't interfere with someone's exercise of their constitutional rights, whether it's their personhood rights or their religious rights. So I just wanted to add that dimension to the discussion, that this was a part of the protest in the anti-abortion movement 30 years ago. I'll take my discussion off the line.
All right, thank you, Rick. I appreciate that. What do you make?
Well,
of it?
I also think I remember when people protest, and I think this is also whether it's what Rick just brought up or on houses of worship, we're also talking about private property. So I know that when people have gone to protest government offices that are in a strip mall, that sometimes that the property owner will say, listen, I know I have a public office here, but the parking lot's still private property. So you can't protest in front of this office. The sidewalk is public. Go ahead and protest there. And maybe that's the situation where, especially in New York City, where you may have synagogues, other places of worship that are right off a parking lot or right off a sidewalk. Maybe that's where there's a difference. Whereas if you're talking about a doctor's office, you're talking about a church and a synagogue upstate in our community that's set back. Maybe it's a little bit different because there already is a buffer zone of private property.
Mm-hmm. Rick, thank you for that phone call. Let me grab an email from Charlie, who 2 points. The really important point was he said, I was the dad who waited at midnight for the next Harry Potter book with my 10-year-old. You and millions of others, Charlie. But more importantly, he says, please ask Mr. Jensen his opinion on improving Tier 6 for young teachers. He says, my millennial teaching colleagues are hurting. They truly can't afford to retire and certainly can't teach for 40 years to wait for their retirement. It's not sustainable. Teaching and education schools are closing. Who would want to teach under these conditions? That's from Charlie.
Yeah. I mean, Charlie, you can tell your son, I support reforming Tier 6 and Tier 5. We've gotten to a circumstance.
You want to explain what that is, by the way?
So Tier 5 and Tier 6 are New York State retirement tiers. And so we have 6 tiers, and every tier has certain level of benefits. I happen to be a Tier 4 employee, so I had to pay into the system for 5 years to become vested. And once I hit 20 years of state service, I qualify for a pension. With Tier 5 and Tier 6, the state reformed, under Andrew Cuomo, reformed those tiers so that it takes longer for state employees, public employees, to vest, and they have to work longer in their career. And there's no, if I retire at 55, I retire at a percentage of a certain salary level. For the newer tiers, you have to work longer and you get a lower percentage of that back when you retire. I think that when we're at a state, not in a state, but at a state where we have a lack of public employees, whether they're teachers, first responders, prosecutors, state employees. You look at one of the criticisms I have is DFS and the way they regulate insurances. They don't have enough employees to regulate insurance, especially health insurance, because they can't attract and recruit and retain these employees because of the retirement tiers. DOH, Department of Health, can't statutorily inspect nursing homes on time because they can't hire enough nurses to enter state service to do these inspections. So if, as a state, we want to attract more public employees to serve the public as public servants, whether they're teachers, firefighters, state workforce, DPW, snowplow drivers, which we're going to need, we have to make sure that it can compete with the private sector when it comes to retirement benefits. And I think looking at getting Tier 5 and Tier 6 more in line with what exists with Tier 4, I think would help to allow greater recruitment and retention.
You also wanted to talk a little bit about online culture, online gaming here.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
Yeah, so the governor is she's picking up some of the legislative proposals of an assembly colleague of mine out of Queens, Nili Rozic, to really look at what online options are available to kids, not restricting necessarily kids using it, but what the back end is making available to kids. And so what the governor's proposing and what Nili Rozic has proposed through her legislation is that it would, if you're a child and you have a child account, they would block people from being able to send you direct messages. AI chatbots wouldn't be applicable. Would block location sharing, and it would cut any ads or access for online gaming platforms. Certainly I've been on my laptop and I've never done online gambling. I've never done sports betting, and I'll have an ad pop up telling me to set a bet and take me to where I'm going.
Right.
My son is 7. He went to our neighbor's house and he played Roblox and Minecraft, and desperately wants it, but we don't want to let him use it because people can chat with you. With the AI we got for my wife's birthday, I bought her the Amazon thing that you put in your kitchen where you can have your calendar, you can bring up recipes, you can watch TV, which I like doing the dishes. Literally, our son was in there last night talking to Alexa and having a full conversation, and Alexa asked about the family dynamics. It's like,
Oof.
one, what prompt were you asking to get her there? But I think having these sort of common sense protections for children, especially as we're in a greater digitalized world, I think make a lot of sense. And going back to the conversation about parents knowing what's best for kids, making sure that parents are the ones deciding when their kids are going to utilize some of these other enhanced capabilities.
Are you comfortable with kids of the present and the future having AI relationships?
No. I mean, it's funny when, I have 7-year-old twins. It's funny when they ask Alexa to play the fart song, or have her tell them a joke. But I don't want my own kids thinking that a conversation with an AI bot is the same as having a conversation with their friends in the lunchroom.
Or a friendship, or even in the future, romantic relationships. I mean,
Yes.
all these things are happening now already.
Yeah.
They're going to happen more often. So is there anything the government should be doing to stop that then?
I mean, I think we've already done some stuff on social media. In last year's session, we put some greater restrictions on child accounts being able to scroll. I think it would make a lot of sense for tech companies to have to create a different set of standards and a different platform within the same platform for adults versus children. Certainly, I think every adult right now uses ChatGPT probably more than we probably should. But it's also having the digital literacy to know what you should use that for and what you shouldn't use that for. And I think that we're not doing enough to teach children and adults about responsible use of this technology.
My sense in general is that if there's a problem in society and you can fix it through the culture, through public discussion and awareness, and you don't have to regulate it, that's probably preferable. My fear with tech is if you don't regulate it, it's going to be hard to stop it.
I understand, agree, and I've been saying this to people a lot lately, is that we are now in a society of immediate returns. We have a small little thing in our pocket the size of a pack of cards that has every aspect of human knowledge, of human history in our pockets. When we order something for food delivery, I think most people, they don't look at the star rating, they look at how quickly it's going to get to their house. And we're now more of a society built on immediate returns rather than the quality of the service we're using. And I think when you look at AI, you look at chatbots, it's like, well, I can get an answer. I can know what's in the governor's budget proposal by just typing in a prompt and I don't have to do any research. That's great. Well, are you really going to go back and check the sources or check the veracity of what that's telling you? I doubt most people are.
You familiar with Dave Ramsey?
No.
Dave Ramsey is an online, well, not just online. He's written books about finance. He's got a podcast, very, very popular among American Republicans, but popular in general. And he recently went on a rant saying online sports gambling is destroying a generation of young men. And it was a mistake for states to allow sports betting. Do you agree?
I've never placed a bet online. I've gambled money in a casino once in my life. So I might be the wrong person to ask whether or not, just because I don't have any experience with it. I do know my brother-in-law, my father, they'll bet on the UFC fights, and they'll bet on and I think this is where the struggle always is, are people doing it responsibly? Or are they doing it in the way that you're paying for entertainment just like you would going to a movie? And are you doing it responsibly? And I think the question is the government, whether New York State government or any other or any other entity that's legalized this, is that are we doing enough to safeguard how people are using it? I also think that, once again, the almighty dollar reigns supreme, where, you see NFL players get suspended for doing mobile sports betting, but every stadium has DraftKings or sports betting advertisements.
Absolutely.
And every segment on ESPN or Fox Sports is, the DraftKings bring you the NFL draft.
Yep.
So you also have these institutions that are pushing people to utilize these things, but they're also the ones who are controlling it. And I think that is the question about, ethically, what is the right way to have these services available?
Right.
To
It
have
becomes
this
kind of
under-
like, can you fix this in the culture, or do you need more regulation? Right now, do you think we need more regulation of it?
I think I'd be interested to, once again, this is going to sound like a coward's way out. I'd like to see more data about,
I don't think that's a coward's way out. This is a big decision.
Are we seeing enough, how many people are utilizing the gambling addiction services? Are we seeing bankruptcy? And especially if we talk about trying to raise revenue through online casino gaming, which is another topic that might be coming up this year or years to come.
No, I don't think that's a dodge at all. I mean, I think there's a lot that we still have to learn, and hopefully we'll start to get more data soon on that. Yeah. Thank you for the time, as always. Great to see you. We
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it. Assembly Member Josh Jensen represents District Number 134. It's part of our series of conversations with your elected leaders about the proposed state budget and what's coming in 2026. More Connections coming up in a moment.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.